Hi, I'm Christina, and this is a book review of I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. So this is a science fiction dystopian novel and it was published in 1995. I first heard about this book when Emily over at Books with Emily Fox recommended it, and if you don't already follow her, I will link her down below so you can go and check her out. So I'll just tell you a little bit more about the author. Jacqueline Harpman was born in 1929 in Belgium, and her family fled to Casablanca when the Nazis invaded, and they didn't return home until after the war. This is her first book to be translated into English, and it was originally published with the title The Mistress of Silence, and sadly the author died in 2012. Now, I absolutely love this book and I have given it 5 stars. It's definitely one of the best science fiction dystopian novels that I have read this year, and in fact it's now one of my favourite science fiction dystopian post-apocalyptic novels that I have ever read. It's up there as one of those favourites. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the plot, but not too much, because I think it's one of those stories you just kind of want to go into not knowing very much at all. So in this story, we have a girl who is our main character, and she is an unnamed narrator. And she is living in a cage with a group of women. There are 40 women in total. There's 39 women and 1 girl who is our main character. And they are in this cage for reasons that they do not know. They don't know why they're there. They don't know where they are. They don't really know how long they've been there. They know very, very little at all about their captivity. All they know is that there are guards who monitor them. They're always male guards, and there's always 3 guards at a time. So I won't tell you anything else about the story. I think that's as much as you really need to know. Kind of a bit vague, but I don't want to give away any spoilers. So I thought it was such an intriguing novel. I thought the main character was so interesting and so intriguing. She's such an interesting character. She's such a strong character, and we follow her throughout her life essentially. So we first meet her when she is a child, and then she's getting a little bit older through the majority of the story. So we know for a fact that when all these women were put in this cage, all of them were adults except her. She was the only child, and they did wonder for a long time if she was actually going to make it, because she just kind of curled herself up into a little ball in the fetal position. She wouldn't talk to anyone, she wouldn't interact with anyone at all. So she's had an incredibly difficult upbringing, obviously, and it's very strange, like surreal, otherworldly experiences. And because no one knows anything at all, we as the reader know very little as well, and as they're trying to work out what is happening or what is going to happen, or all of these reasons about who is controlling them, we as the reader are kind of discovering those things along with them. Now, in terms of the ending, it's more of an open ending. I'm not going to ruin anything for you. But you definitely don't get all of your questions answered, and normally that's something that I do not like. I normally just don't appreciate that at all, but this book does it so well, and it's such an intriguing kind of concept, and the characters are so well written that I didn't mind that the answers weren't answered. I kind of thought that a lot of them couldn't be answered. In fact, I'm not quite sure how she could have given a truly satisfying answer to all of the questions. And I think that's really interesting, because essentially we're just kind of going along as if we're one of the women in captivity. We know so little. And I thought that was a really interesting way of kind of portraying it, to give the readers and the characters so little information that basically there's thousands of questions and maybe just a handful of answers. And I think that actually feels very realistic. If something like this were to ever happen, I assume the people involved would know very little, and the people who were keeping them there for whatever reason would want them to know as little as possible. So much so that they don't even know the times of the day, or whether it's night or day. And they aren't even sure if they go to sleep for the same amount of time what would be each night, and they don't know if they have the same amount of time between when they're given food or not. So they have literally no construct of time at all. They don't know if hours have passed, minutes have passed, days have passed. And yeah, so interesting. I think the way that she looks at time as well is so well done. It's so interesting. And yeah, the characters are brilliant. Just feel like you don't get to know a lot about these women. So from the women who were adults who obviously had lives prior to this captivity, they don't really want to talk about their past because it is so incredibly painful for them. And also there's memory issues too. They don't always necessarily know what's happened in the past. And I think that was also a very interesting way of doing it. I think you definitely could have spent a lot of the book kind of building backstories and building, you know, looking at people's families, looking at people's relationships, their jobs, just really exploring their past and seeing the kind of person they were. So she doesn't explore the backstories particularly of any of these characters, and nearly every single one of the characters is essentially a blank slate. And we kind of explore how friendships form between these women, how romantic relationships form between these women, how just kind of different kind of allegiances and people who don't really get on so much, kind of how it would be in real life. Obviously, some people are naturally drawn to other people, and just seeing how 40 women would survive together and work together and try and problem solve together. And I think the world kind of building that she does it's very sparse in the sense of there's so many questions and you don't really know a lot of the things. And I won't go into spoilers. I think I'll do a little bit of a discussion at the end if you have read this book, just so I can say a little bit more about some of these things. So yeah, I would highly recommend this book. I thought it was absolutely wonderful. I think the characters are brilliant. You just can't help but rooting for these characters. And I think your main character as well, you see her just develop and you see her age and you see her mature, and she becomes such an interesting, capable, independent, strong woman. She's really a brilliant main character, and following her life is so intriguing. And yeah, I also thought it was, obviously it's very sad at times. It is a very hard-hitting book in places, and I think it's absolutely heart-wrenching at times as well. So a lot of the women are all different ages. She is obviously the youngest. Some of the women were a lot older, and it's kind of been years and years and years. So obviously some women will be dying of kind of natural causes in older age, and obviously there's other more kind of shocking deaths as well. And it's not a happy book, obviously. It's a very sad book, and I'd say it's a very bleak book, but also it's so hopeful. There's so much hope there that even though it's sad and it's bleak, it's really incredibly uplifting in a way, and I think that's because she's just written it so incredibly well. And this edition actually has an introduction by Sophie McIntosh, and I read one of her books earlier this year called Cursed Bread because it was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2023, and I absolutely love that book too. I'll link my book review of that one down below just in case you're interested. So when I picked up this book and I found out that the introduction was written by an author that I also absolutely loved, it just kind of came full circle. I think it's brilliant. So 5 stars, one of the best science fiction books I've read this year, one of the best kind of dystopian post-apocalyptic books I've ever read. It's up there as one of my favourites now. I am definitely looking forward to seeing if I can find anything else by her. I think she's kind of a difficult author to find copies of now, but I'll definitely look. So yes, I'm going to say I would highly recommend it, and I'm going to move over to kind of the more discussion part of the video now. So if you haven't read the book and you don't want to hear any spoilers, I'll say goodbye now. And if you do read it, please do come back and tell me what you thought of it. Let me know down in the comments, but I'll say goodbye for now. Okay, so if you're still here, I'm moving into the kind of discussion side. So I think the thing I enjoyed most about this is just all of the questions. So essentially, there's so many things we don't know, and I had so many different theories. So our main character, as you know, spends a lot of time figuring out time. So when she's in the cage, and everybody's in the cage, the women have discussed everything for years and years and years. They've asked every question that can be posed. They've just gone round in circles trying to figure out why they're there, where they are, what's happening, trying to figure out their final kind of memories before they were captive, been held captive, kind of thinking about there was fires and there was screaming, and then everyone's memories are very hazy. They think they might have been drugged for a very long time, which kind of could be related to the amnesia, and people remember very, very little. And because it's been years and years and years, and they've discussed it a lot for a very long time, they've kind of come to the stage where there isn't really anything else to say, there isn't really anything else to talk about. And they've just kind of come to some kind of impasse when really anything they would say would just be kind of treading the same ground. They wouldn't really have any new questions to raise. They wouldn't really make any progress at all in their conversation. So kind of naturally, they just kind of stopped talking about it. And they also found out that when they were talking about kind of serious things, the main character, the girl who's called the child, gets very upset by a lot of things too. So they try and just kind of not include her in these conversations, and just try and give her a slightly better childhood that they could possibly do. So yes, when she's trying to figure out time, she sits there and she starts counting her heartbeats, and then she tries to count her heartbeats between the time of the shifts of the guards. So she basically figures out a clock, if you will, and then she tries to figure out like the length of a day. So she'll see this guard starts at 0 beats of heartbeats, and then when the guards change over, she's had like however many thousands of heartbeats. And then one of the other women in here kind of does some calculations, and they try and work out a unit of time reference, like a frame, and then they use that kind of going forward to determine a day and etc. Anyway, they eventually get out of the cage, and it was just a complete fluke in the sense that the sirens go off. I assume the sirens have never ever gone off before, and then the guards just flee in, we assume, panic. And we don't know why the sirens have gone off, and we don't know where the guards have gone. But as the siren went off, the guard was just putting the key in the lock, and they were free. They could get out. So within she said it was about 10, 11 minutes of them realising they were free, leaving, getting out of the bunker, going out into the open world, and the guards are nowhere to be seen at all. And I was wondering, they probably can't have gone by a car or any kind of land vehicle, because you'd see the tracks in the ground, but you don't. And presumably if they'd gone by kind of helicopter or something, you would have heard that, because they're quite noisy. And obviously there's the question of, is this Earth or is this another planet? And there's so many questions, so I'll just have a quick little discussion about some of my thoughts, but I'll try and keep it brief, because honestly I could talk about these questions probably for hours, because there's just so many things you could consider. So some of the things they discover are the bunkers are set out in groups of 5, and they're in a rectangle shape with one in the middle. So looks kind of like a human idea to kind of make a little box with a little one in the middle. So they've been a little group of 5. And we know that all of the guards were male. And the question of, is this Earth or is this not Earth, comes up because of the lack of seasons. So they know that the days don't get longer or shorter, and because she's now a decent kind of set of time, because she counts heartbeats and she can figure out the length of the days now, they don't think the days get longer and shorter as they would naturally with seasons. And they also know that it doesn't go through like traditional seasons of spring, summer, autumn, winter. It stays fairly the same, I would say, maybe a little bit different. And then there's the kind of like just this landscape with barely anything on it at all, and you go over like these hills and there's definitely still trees. They do some building, and there's little rivers, but I think they're kind of few and far between. And they basically, once they have left, they go out to find civilization and humanity, which they don't ever find actually, which is very interesting, because I assume if it was Earth, you would eventually find some kind of civilization, even if every single person on the planet had been killed, you would still find, obviously, proof that we have lived there. You'd find buildings, you'd find towns, you'd find vehicles, you'd find everything that proves that humanity exists. And they don't find anything like that at all. The only thing that she finds, so also they go off searching for a long time as a big group, and then after a certain couple of years, some of the older women start getting poorly and start dying, so they decide to settle down. They build a little town in a way. They build a few houses, they do a little bit, they teach themselves kind of carpentry, and they use the wood, and they become kind of more, you know, using of the land. One of the good things is they don't need to think about food as such. So every single bunker, I've gone back on another tangent, I'll go back to what I was going to say in a minute. Every single bunker is identical, it is exactly the same. They have the bars, they have the captivity bit, they have the staircase, they have the refrigerator, and the refrigerator has meat for years and years and tinned goods for years and years, and they have pasta and rice and things like that. So they have a lot of dried goods, a lot of tinned goods, and a lot of meat in refrigerators. And the electricity always stays on. So throughout the whole of the book, through the whole span, for the decades, the electricity is always on. There's always lights, the fridge and the freezer, you know, they're always working. Which would suggest maybe people are still around somewhere. But also on her travels, she never finds proof of where the electricity is coming from. She never actually finds the source of where the electricity is coming from, which is very strange because you assume that you would eventually come across that. And she doesn't find any other type of vehicle. So she finds one vehicle, and that is a bus. And it looks as though it's a bus presumably full of soldiers, because we know they're in trousers and jackets, and the jackets have epaulets, so I'm assuming it's a military bus. And every single person has a bag with identical items in. I think they have, you know, a jacket, trousers, some underpants, and a razor, and a bottle of vodka. I'm assuming it's vodka. And they also have a book, and the book is about gardening, like a condensed version of gardening. So you'd assume maybe they are in a new land or in a new world, and they've put them there with, you know, the essentials. And the fact they all have the exact same things, I would assume, means that they're military, because it's kind of like standard issue to everyone in the military. But unsure why they would then be dead. So I'm also unsure about how everyone died or where everyone went. So when the guards disappeared, it took them 11 minutes to leave, actually escape, because they were so shocked and there was so much going on and they were terrified. So it took them 11 minutes exactly, and the guards had just absolutely disappeared, never to be seen again. And throughout all of the years and the decades and the journeys, they never once see sign of a single guard. They don't meet any of them. So presumably they aren't there anymore. They're either, it's a different planet and they're not on the planet. Perhaps when the siren went off, they all went off in a spaceship and they're just gone, perhaps. But if it is another planet, they've taken a lot of things to that planet. They've taken, I don't know how many bunkers there are, but it seems like there's an endless number of bunkers in this group of 5. So they've taken everything that you need to build the bunker, and they've taken, you know, the metal to build the cages, and so many freezers to freeze the meat, and then there's boots in every single one, and there's blankets, and there's mattresses. The other thing is there's no beds in the bunkers, which would suggest that the guards don't stay there overnight, they don't sleep there, so presumably they have accommodation elsewhere, and yet they've never found that either. Yeah, so many questions. Thinking it's not Earth in the sense of how would they have taken all of that stuff to another planet, all of the meat, all of the tin goods, all of the dried goods, all of the metal to build the things, all of the things to make the electricity and the light bulbs, and just so much stuff. I'm not quite sure how all of that would have gone to another planet, and then also presumably hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who you're keeping in captivity for some reason, which we never find out why. And if they were keeping them in captivity to kind of breed humans and repopulate the planet, they were keeping all the men and all the women separate. So presumably that wasn't a plan, like a short-term plan, it might have been a long-term plan. Also, I think the assumption is you're just going to find groups of 40 women in these bunkers, and actually some of the bunkers contain 40 men rather than 40 women, which was interesting because I assumed it was just going to be the women who were in captivity, but it's not, it's also the men. And I don't think they find another child at all. I think she's the only child they find, which would suggest that maybe it was an accident that she was there, and that's what some of the women had kind of come up with too. They thought that there's just an adult women in here, and then this one girl's just kind of got sent there by mistake, and maybe she was meant to be sent somewhere else. Maybe there's another planet or another colony or another whole area that the kids go, or who knows. So yeah, it seems like she's the one who is rare. She's the only child there. So probably it was just a mistake. Maybe it was just like a administrative error that she ended up there, but we don't really know for sure. So yeah, so many different questions. So yeah, I'm not sure if it's Earth, because if it was Earth, we would have found some kind of life, you know, some kind of remnants of human civilization, which she doesn't find. And she walks for years and years and years. So after every single person dies and she's completely alone, she just keeps walking. And one day she does find like a bunker idea, and it's a very fancy bunker in the sense that it's carpeted and it's beautifully furnished, and it's got vases, and it's got a bathroom complete with a bath, and it also has running water. It has hot water and cold water that still works. And I think the pantry area is filled with years and years and years and years worth of food. She's got enough food to last her entire lifetime. And I think that's the other thing as well. There's absolutely no food on this planet. There's absolutely nothing the women could eat. There doesn't seem to be like berries or fruit or vegetables or anything growing at all. I think she says she does find mushrooms, but obviously you don't know if they're poisonous or not, so you wouldn't eat them. There doesn't seem to be a single animal here at all. Not a bird, not an insect, not cats, dogs, nothing. There's no birds. There isn't any other life at all, it would seem, which would also feel like to say maybe it isn't Earth, because unless there was something that wiped out every single person and every single animal and every single bird, you know, etc. But then if there was, then presumably you'd be finding the carcasses of these animals, lots of them. And if not the carcass, then the bones. You'd see where they've lived, if you know what I mean. And there's none of that either. So yeah, it's so interesting. There's so many questions. It's one of those books that you kind of really want to talk about and discuss. And I think this would be a brilliant book for a book club. I think you could sit here and chat about this for, you know, hours, genuinely. You could go round and round in circles trying to figure out what's happened, why has it happened, who's done it, what was the plan, what was the purpose. I guess the other thing that made me think there had to be a bigger purpose is that the cost involved in this would be astronomical. You have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, and you are feeding every single one of them, and they're not just being fed like rations or kind of what the astronauts would eat. They're being fed real food, real meat, real fruit, you know, real veg, real pasta and stuff, real potatoes. So they're not eating brilliantly, like, you know, there's not loads of choice, but there's enough food that's keeping them going. And it just would cost so much money to keep feeding them and to keep providing them with water and, you know, to keep all the electricity on for decades. And yet we never seem to see who was the big person behind this, if it even was a person, like who was organising this and who was controlling this and why was any of it happening. And I guess the other thing that makes me feel like it was probably people and not maybe some kind of alien race is the way in which it's so organised. It sounds like it would be humans. They have 40 people in every single bunker. They have the bunkers built in groups of 5, so there's 200 people in every area, and then the bunkers are built at, you know, an equal length, they think, away from the other bunkers. So it sounds very regimented, very organised, like someone had a plan. You know, you put 200 people in a little group in a 5, 40, 40, 40, and you've done women separate from men. Always, that never mixes, and she literally never finds another person who is alive. So I think the fact that the sirens happened to go off at that exact moment he just put the key in the lock, and they were free to escape, was like a 1 in a million chance. Every other bunker they find is just full of dead people, every single one. All the people are still inside the bunker, they're all dead, they're all corpses, nobody survived, no one at all. And they don't seem to find a dead guard anywhere on the road trying to escape who just missed something, whatever it was. We never see the guards ever again. We never hear from them again. We never see their corpse. The only other people we find that are dead that aren't in a bunker are the people on the bus. And that's it. So my other thought was maybe in the beginning, if it is Earth, maybe it's somewhere like the Australian desert or the Sahara desert, some kind of desert. But then there's lots of little places where there's little rivers and then there's trees. And that doesn't seem like that would really work particularly. And then also, if you just kept walking and walking and walking and walking, eventually you're going to find some kind of life of some kind of, well, you're going to find life as well. There's scorpions, there's snakes, there's all those things, and there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing here at all. Not a single animal. There isn't anything else that's alive, which doesn't seem like it would be Earth. So yeah, I'm gonna wrap it up here because I could genuinely go around in circles trying to answer this book. And ultimately, she passes away when she is in her early 60s, I think. And she thinks that she has some kind of cancer of her womb because when she's going to the toilet, there's lots of blood. She's very, very poorly and she's in a lot of pain. And she decides that she will write her story. So she's still living in this bunker that she found. One more aside quickly before we finish. That bunker would suggest that there was someone with a lot of money who was also going to be there. So it's not just the guards who presumably are under employment by someone and being paid presumably by someone. And then all of these people who are in captivity for whatever reason, presumably they're there for a purpose. But this person had kind of a bunker that was made especially for them and obviously furnished very nicely, lots of food, like a beautiful place to live, you know, in the circumstances. And that person never shows up, so presumably they've died or they never got here if it isn't Earth. They never kind of managed to get across. But that's the only one she ever finds too, and it's hidden by stones. And presumably if this was something like this, there'd be lots of wealthy people who would like to be treated the same way. So I would have thought she'd find, you know, at least a couple of bunkers in the same kind of vibe, you know, with nicely furnished and lots of food. I would have presumed there's other people there who wouldn't just be in captivity that would be maybe profiting from this, but no, nothing like that at all, which also makes you question it. So yeah, basically she dies and she's in her 60s and she's written everything down. She finds lots of paper and the other women had taught her how to read, kind of, you know, just kind of writing it in the sand. And she's incredibly intelligent and she wants to learn always. She's always seeking knowledge, thirsting for knowledge, even if it isn't knowledge she can readily use, so she can read. And then she finds that there's some books in this place, and so she decides to write down her story. And she writes the whole story, which is essentially the story you just read, and then she dies. And that's the end of the story. And she literally has lived for like 20 years without seeing a single person. So in terms of time, they think she was about 5 or 6 years old when she was first put in the cage. And then she thinks she was about 15 or 16 when they escaped. So they think they were in the cage for about a decade. And then she knows for a fact that the final woman dies 23 years later, and she's called Laura. So she's about 38, we think. And then she walks solidly for 2 years before she finds that bunker. So then when she finds that bunker, she's about 40. And then we skip like 22 years. She says that was 22 years ago. So she's been going on missions from this bunker for the best part of, you know, just over 2 decades. And again, she hasn't found any answers. She hasn't found another single human being who is alive or another animal or anything at all. And yeah, I think I'm going to wrap it up here because I could generally talk about this for ages. But I think it was wonderfully done. It was so interesting and I absolutely loved it. I think it was really well written. I thought the style of it was brilliant. I thought the characters were excellent, and yeah, I think it was very hard hitting, and yeah, it was also very uplifting and just a really, really good book. I'd highly, highly recommend it. So if you have read it, I would love to know your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you're thinking of reading it now, please do let me know that too. So if you've liked the video, please do like it. And if you would like to see more of me talking about books, please do subscribe. I'll see you in my next one.